This month's Where Did the Road Go is brought to you by 6 amazing people. Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Bart Ooms, Billuminati, 36 Dingo, and Michael Fritzky. If you want to become a patron, www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And I am here with AP Strange.
Hello.
And Anthony Tyler.
How's it going, everybody?
And you've been on the show a bunch of times, Anthony.
Yes, I have. Thank you for having me back on. It's always a pleasure, man.
And this is kind of a swap cast with your podcast, which is called what?
Black Hoodie Alchemy.
All right.
Yeah. You can check it out anywhere you stream your action. It's alchemy and lots of dark subject matter, you know, for good philosophical purposes. But yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. There's lots going on.
So this came about because apparently, Anthony, you had wanted to do a show with AP about this, and one of my listeners, Michael Fritzky, I hope I'm saying that right, has sent me just a ton of books I had on my Amazon wish list. He's been absolutely amazing about this. And one of the books he sent me was The Goblin Universe, which I've always wanted to read, by Ted Holiday, and technically a little by Colin Wilson. And I said to my Slack group, I'm like, hey, anyone know this book? And AP was like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to do a show on that book. So now we're all going to do it together. So
I mentioned this book when we talked about Alien Animals, the Janet and Colin Board book.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Although I don't know if that was in the actual episode. I think that might have just been the Patreon. But yeah, we had Super Inframan and I had a side conversation about this one.
So the interesting thing about this is that the introduction is a third of the book.
Yeah.
It is literally 46 pages out of a roughly 200 page book. So I guess a fourth. It's a fourth of the book. And the story seems to be that Ted Holiday wrote this sometime in the 70s. I can't find an exact date when he wrote it. And he passed away in 1979. And he sent this to Colin, and Colin loved it. And then Ted decided he didn't like it and he wasn't going to publish it. And he just kind of left it. And when Ted passed away, Colin asked his wife, hey, I still have this manuscript. Can I put it out? And Ted's wife said yes. And it's a book way ahead of its time, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair.
And so what I did is I grabbed, in the spirit of the Brothers of the Serpent podcast, we're not going to read the whole book, obviously, but I took paragraphs out of it so I can read a paragraph and we can discuss it because there's a lot of really interesting stuff in here. But I kind of broke it down to the stuff Colin was talking about and then the stuff Ted was talking about. So the first part here is all stuff from Colin's introduction. He says that Holiday was also moving toward the view that both dragons and flying saucers may be symbols, or perhaps a better word would be signals. That is to say that their purpose may be to remind human beings that reality is altogether stranger and more complex than they think. The question of precisely who is making the signals is left open, but in the 12th chapter of The Dragon and the Disc, which is one of Ted's earlier books, he admits that by 1970 I had rejected the superficial view of monster phenomena, that they are just unknown animals that have somehow escaped the science net as inadequate. And he goes on to cite references in Celtic literature to the idea that the serpent is an apparition or phantom. And he goes on to suggest that in the ancient world, the disc may have been worshipped in many places, while the dragon was worshipped by other groups. Such groups would today be called Satanists. He points out that the Irish churches seem to lack the serpent designs found in so many English churches, and suggests that perhaps this is what is meant by the legend of St. Patrick banished the serpents from Ireland, that he destroyed the ancient religion of dragon worship.
Yeah, that's it's wild stuff. I like where his brain goes. And like I can't say I've parsed through all the data on like Celtic mythology and things like that. But And I feel like with Ted Holiday, I think it's kind of a recurring theme in just in like Fortean literature in general. And I think that's part of why I enjoy it is, there's what you might call like I think it would be like a pareidolia at times where you're like finding patterns in random things, but that doesn't necessarily it's not meant to be derogatory or even discouraging. Like I think in some ways that's the investigative quality, and like it's all throughout this book. Like he talks about like he brings up some really fascinating bits and pieces, and then he'll do stuff like try and disprove like basic adaptation and evolution, which just doesn't really stand up all that well. So like I think that again, I'm not an expert on Celtic mythology, but it seems like really great food for thought, and it's a really good representation of like where his brain goes with the research, and it's very like John Keelian, Jacques Vallee. It's of that same ilk, most certainly.
It seems like, you mentioned the evolution thing. He devotes an entire chapter how evolution does seem to work, but it doesn't explain species. And then he goes on to a whole other theory, which I'm not sure if that's been debunked or not. But he's not wrong. I mean, we see evolution in certain ways, but we still don't see like entirely new species popping into existence.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's he raises interesting points, and there's stuff to chew on. But I think a lot of times, like just to kind of expand on the subject matter, and another example of where I really like his train of thought, and I don't necessarily agree with it, was where he basically makes the supposition that the like serial killer that used to fight alongside Joan of Arc, Gilles de Rais, was reincarnated as the Jersey monster Edward Paisnel.
Yeah.
Very interesting story. I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts on that more.
Well, I was curious what you thought about that too, because it kind of reminded me of some of the stuff you wrote in the was it the Dive Manual? You got a little bit about serial killers in one of your books. Yeah,
Hunt Manual. The second one. I'll say this just as like a one-time organic plug. Like you could go check out my book Hunt Manual, because I was writing it. I finished like the rough draft. And as I was whittling it more and more, sculpting it out, I came across the Goblin Universe, and it's such a difficult book to find. You guys, it's pretty badass that it puts a genuine smile on my face that you got physical copies. I'm just happy to have a PDF, which AP Strange was kind enough to gift me. After I told him, I was like, so I wrote this book. I put out Hunt Manual, and I talk about the Goblin Universe a little bit because I scoured and read as much as I could about the commentary on it, but I really couldn't find a PDF. So after talking with AP, I finally got it, and that's what kind of stirred up us getting into this conversation here. But a lot of like Hunt Manual is it's very different, but the inspirations are very similar, spiritually, like almost identical in the idea of probing the idea of the what you would call on like to try and get as empirical as possible, like the Jungian shadow complex, and what might be said of that about what that might involve with unexplainable phenomena in general. And in terms of like true crime, something like the Jersey Monster and Gilles de Rais, like I think I think it really rings to like the archetypal capacity of things. But I mean, clearly there's no like direct evidence or anything. Right. But he makes some interesting bits, like the fact that his wife was named Joan. They were very interested, and they had similar general interests. And these people were definitely interested in the occult.
But you see that with like Lincoln and Kennedy too.
Yeah.
You see all those similarities. I think sometimes life just does that.
Exactly. Yeah.
I like to say that reality rhymes with itself.
Yeah.
And I think there's definitely some, the more you look into true crime, I'm not so much interested in the brutality of it, not really at all, as much as I am interested in the sheer, I don't know, unexplainable, for lack of a better term. There's some cases that you look into where you just how could that have possibly happened? And so how does it happen? And, you look into like, Dahmer was creating the altar. He had the plans to create the altar of bones, and there's talk about there's like a surprising amount of I don't know if you'd call it, like, I guess accounts. Yeah, accounts would be a good way to put it, of like poltergeists in Ted Bundy's childhood home. There's the more you look into it, the more you find that I think because I even go into exorcism a little bit, and I don't think that that's a very slippery slope. And I think that it gets into hysteria quickly. But where my research went with a lot of this, with like the Goblin Universe in general, was it seemed to have some sort of relationship to the human nervous system and how we process that on an imaginative or even, metaphysical level. Like you look into phantom limb therapy, or like even the sleep paralysis and the projection of the shadow people, or even dreams. There's some sort of, when our nervous system becomes overloaded, something happens and a projection process occurs. And I think that there's a lot to be said about unexplainable phenomena. Like, I don't think that's where the whole explanation lies, but I do think that's where the trail of breadcrumbs starts. And if you want to get more and more metaphysical with it, I think that there's every possibility for, let's say this projection process is in motion and in effect. And if there's fertile enough soil, if you will, with the projection, then it might be able to, be like a bottle for a genie. And there might be every possibility for something, sentient or at least completely autonomous to then interact. But I think that if you try and try and make any sort of sense out of, the Goblin Universe at large, it has to start with the projection process somewhere.
Yeah. And he makes a connection there. He makes the connections with Joan of Arc and this guy, but they're very flimsy to me, the way they're connected. Like he's viewing it as, this is pretty much proof of reincarnation. And I'm thinking the best proof we have of reincarnation is kids remembering past lives spontaneously. Like, period. And this was probably written before that was really well known.
Colin Wilson in his introduction is like actually is critical of that chapter.
Yeah.
I think it's the one part that he quibbles with in the introduction, but he still kind of says like it's an interesting idea, but he didn't flesh it out very well.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes you wonder what it would have looked like if he had lived long enough to make a final draft.
And the Joan of Arc stuff on its own is interesting. Like her whole story is fascinating. But
and I mean, there's arguments to be made that there's UFO related or tangential stuff with Joan of Arc, visionary experiences and such.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
He also notes in this book at some point that areas of paranormal activity are also areas that strong emotions have been experienced, which I mean is not nowadays. That seems almost common sense. Like we know that. Mm-hmm. But I think back in the 70s, this was more of an actual observation.
Yeah, he was really hitting some nails on the head. It's really in the same vein in terms of, still being relevant as, like John Keel's Eighth Tower.
Yes.
Like you could, if anyone hasn't read that, it's still, when a Fortean kind of book is really like extra good, in my opinion, it's, they always have these sort of tangential like case studies or anecdotal stories, and sometimes they age better than others, and in certain books it's like it's pretty timeless, and maybe you've never heard of it, and maybe it's not that it's debatable how relevant it is, but it's weaved into the narrative so well. And Holiday, especially for an incomplete draft, he does a pretty great job of weaving some sort of strange narrative here where you don't always understand how he gets to these conclusions, but you see his train of thought. And I think the train of thought particularly was way ahead of its time.
And they all.
I mean, it was kind of in the milieu too of a lot of Fortean thinkers in the 70s were leaning towards the Jungian. I think that was kind of a thing in general, like Keel would, and Loren Coleman would. You had like Robert Anton Wilson writing a lot.
Sure.
And if you look at Fortean Times from the 70s, it's like a Jungian freak fest. The articles were pretty wild back then.
No kidding.
So,
And one of the people he brings up that I think is also very not known is T.C. Lethbridge, who is mentioned numerous times in here, and I'm always like, oh, T.C. Lethbridge, who I do want to do a show on at some point, but it seems like most people in Forteana, in the paranormal, have no idea who he is.
I don't think I've heard that name outside of this. Yeah.
Honest,
that partly speaks to like the divide, even though we speak the same language between
UK
English researchers and Americans.
Yeah, it does.
Where, like, a lot of the English people, the English guys don't really get the same play over here. And obviously Holiday and Wilson being Brits would have been more familiar, but
well, they were. I think they were friends too.
Right.
And I hadn't heard of T.C. Lethbridge until there's a band called The Clan Destined, which has the vocalist for Skyclad in it, and he, I guess it was a band called T.C. Lethbridge in the UK, and they covered the song T.C. Lethbridge, and I was like, who's T.C. Lethbridge? And I looked up his books sell for a fortune on Amazon, of course. I was able to get a compilation of like his different theories and stuff, but he kind of takes a very grounded approach to paranormal phenomenon. It's well worth checking into.
I think Wilson writes more about him in a book called Beyond the Occult.
Okay. I
know he writes about him somewhere, but I know that some of that introduction is lifted. If you're paying attention and you're a big Wilson fan, you start to notice that when he writes introductions to things, he kind of summarizes stuff he wrote in other books and like manages to shoehorn it into the introduction. So the Lethbridge material in the introduction for this one appears in another book of his, and I think it's Beyond the Occult.
Okay. I also just got a biography of T.C. Lethbridge from Michael as well, so I'm going to check that out, and maybe, I don't know, that author might probably still alive, unlike both of these guys, unfortunately. So I might be able to have him on to talk about T.C. Lethbridge. So I quoted one of the stories Ted tells in here, because he's had a bunch of his own personal experiences that he relates throughout the book, and this one was a ghost experience, he said. And he said, by this time I was half sat up in bed and feeling some apprehension. We are often assured by pundits who have never been in a haunted house that ghosts are a product of expectation and imagination. I can assure these people that this is bunk. The thing that was happening was real, and it confounded my natural expectation of the apparition. If it came into the room, would enter by the door. The room was gloomy, but not entirely dark, thanks to the night-long Scottish gloaming, and my gaze was fixed on the door. In fact, it never went near the door. The steps had now ceased, and suddenly I became aware that the ghost had taken a shortcut by coming in a straight line from the stairhead and passed through several feet of masonry and was now beside the bed. I was now lying back hard against the headboard of the bed on one elbow, trying to see the intruder. Two things happened. A man's voice, speaking in a small Belfast accent, suddenly demanded, "And who the hell are ye?" Simultaneously, a heavy blow crashed on the headboard above my head, exactly as if delivered by a hard fist. I not only heard the blow, but I felt it, since my back was pressed hard against the board. For several minutes, I remained frozen in position, expecting an even more unpleasant manifestation. Gradually, however, I realized that the power that had produced the effects was depleted. I could sense the atmosphere returning to normal. Even Soul, I don't know who Soul was offhand, didn't care to sleep until dawn began to lighten the window, when I turned over and slumbered for several hours.
Yeah, it's a weird story. I've had some weird encounters, like UFOs I've seen and things like that, but never anything ghostly. But anytime I hear a story like that, it always makes me think of I can't remember what book it's in. It's probably in multiple, honestly. But the concept that Jacques Vallee has of just like seems like some sort of completion of a circuit here, like the human being involved in the situation, potentially it does seem like, whether or not we have any sort of science for it, it would at least make like some sort of heuristic sense that there is absorbed energy, and people have tried to look into that, and as far as I know, haven't really found anything really to build that theory with, but there's so much science that we don't know out there, and it seems like if the matter could absorb, keep information intact in some way, it does seem to be. You could be skeptical all you like, but there's a lot of cases of hotspot locations, obviously, and only so much of it can be chalked up to placebo. So I don't know. There's something going on there.
And this one doesn't seem like it was a repeat sort of thing. Like it seems like it was responding to him.
True. Yeah.
But maybe, I mean, if we take time into effect here, maybe this guy was walking through this, place back, 300 years ago and came across the specter of Ted Holiday laying in his bed.
Yeah, it sounds like very Donnie Darko-ish almost. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah, I've wondered that about my own experiences with poltergeist activity or seeing weird things, because it's like I always have felt like there was some time travel aspect to it.
Yeah, I'm on that kind of vein of thinking. I've had just idea. Couldn't call it a theory. That it seems like in like intuition, if there's any sort of like afterlife review and where you're going through your life and actually having some sort of more objective reaction to it, it makes sense that you might feel that in intuition itself. So it's a really out there thought, but it's always stuck with me. So yeah, I do think that there's something. I think that the human experience and the if you just want to call it intuition, I guess, is something that can potentially exist outside of time. Like I definitely know for a fact that people have dreams of the future. I don't trust people who say they can do it like on command, but I've talked to many people who have had weird dreams and snippets that have happened in broad day, however long later, and like these weird things happen, and don't claim to know what it is, but it's clear that they do.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. He talks a lot about precognition in one of the chapters, and I grabbed one of the stories out of here. The most terrible land accident of recent British history, now remember this is published in the 70s, took place on October 21st, 1966, when 116 children, 28 adults were killed in a sea of coal waste which slid down a South Wales slag heap in Aberfan after a heavy rain. During inquiries following the disaster, stories about precognition were rumored. Peter Fairley, science correspondent of the Evening Standard, collected 76 cases which were analyzed by Dr. J.C. Barker. Of these, some 22 subjects were able to supply the names of witnesses who confirmed that the apparent precognition occurred prior to the catastrophe. One little boy, aged 8, did a drawing the day before he was killed. It showed slag heaps and was captioned, "The End." That evening, the same little boy reported a man near the bathroom door. This was probably an apparitional form because no one could be found. Another child, 9-year-old Errol May, startled her mother by saying, "Mummy, I'm not afraid to die." Her mother tried to direct her attention away from making such morbid remarks, but the little girl insisted, "No, I shall be with Peter and Jane." Errol, Peter, and Jane were buried side by side in the Great Mass grave.
Yeah, it on a slightly, not to make light of a tragedy, but this is making me think a little bit of that Nicolas Cage movie Knowing. Have you guys ever seen that?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just losing his mind over like the gematria and the math that is predicting tragedies and things like that. And I think I don't know. There's been plenty of strange cases. Gematria and math, especially. That's where there's like that fine line between using like mysticism, esotericism, or magic to for some sort of insight, and then just falling deep off into the rabbit hole of like your own OCD checks and balances and things.
Well, that's Kenneth Grant.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, good example.
I like Kenneth Grant's stuff, but man, when he gets into the gematria stuff, it'll be like paragraph after paragraph of, well, this connects to this, and this number connects to this, and this connects to, and you're going, okay, you're making my brain hurt.
Yeah, I just don't know how much good it does in the long run. It's like the number 23 with Jim Carrey, man. Like,
right.
So it's a fun concept, but it just just the more you try to expound upon it, it's like, what are we doing here? I don't really know. And it's hardly
it's like Enigma is a real thing though.
Totally. Yeah. No, that's a good point. The movie more so, what are we doing here? The 23 Enigma is pretty interesting though.
Yeah.
So he says in here that 3 weeks is about the time period that most people have premonitions of stuff by. Now in time loops, who wrote time loops? I can't remember his name.
Eric Wargo.
Thank you. I think says it's like 3 days is the common denominator he found.
So it's the magic number.
Yeah. So he's saying, and I've had, dreams that gave me information about stuff, not so much precognitive dreams where I was experiencing it, but given information about stuff that didn't happen for 6 years. Wow. So that's...
Yeah, I've had that.
Yeah. So, I mean, 3 weeks might be the average. I don't know. But he also, of course, goes into a whole chapter in here in Nostradamus, which, I'm not sure how I feel about Nostradamus at this point. Like, I'm not all that convinced there's anything all that significant there.
Yeah, I think that might be a reasonable case for, some sort of pareidolia going on there. I don't know. And maybe, it's also... If there is such a thing, well, because I mean, obviously there is, I'm just more skeptical of people, again, who claim that they can do it like on command. But I don't know, maybe if you just throw enough darts blindly at a board, you're bound to hit a few. And, it's a numbers game. And even if that is the case, I don't know. There's still probably some credit in there for him, but I'm not really an expert. It seems like one of those things like the Kennedy assassination, where it's just such well-trod territory at this point. Like, I don't know if I really, one day maybe I'll look into Nostradamus more, but it's like, it seems like there's plenty of commentary on it and no one's really gotten anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. But the interesting thing, he talks about that. Then he says Errol's foresight, as well as the foresight of various adult witnesses, seemed to extend forward in time to about 14 days prior to the accident. This may be related to a very curious phenomena observed by the writer on October 8th, 13 days before the Aberfan disaster happened. About 7:30 in the evening of that day, I was standing on the lifeboat slip at Tenby Harbor, fishing for whiting in the company of a dozen or so men and boys. It was a calm, clear night with a brilliant display of stars. Eventually, we all became aware of an object in the sky directly overhead, looking like a small, luminous, blue-gray cloud, and it was orbiting slowly in a circle equal to about 3 times its own diameter. About 10 minutes later, there were exclamations from several of the fishermen as a dark object came out of the cloud and beamed a brilliant red light down on us. I felt a shock on realizing that here was a UFO going through the sort of weird maneuvers described in the press, but which I had never believed likely. The object with the red light was now moving leisurely in a southwesterly direction. Simultaneously, the blue cloud was moving easterly at a rather faster speed. Months later, I tried to plot the tracks of these two objects. The luminous cloud was easier since it moved from a point directly overhead toward the east, and it was possible to use the lifeboat slip as sort of a datum. Assuming that it would hold a steady course, I projected a line across the width of Wales. I noticed that the cloud-like object had in fact held a steady course for 57 miles from the point we saw it. It would have arrived over or very near Aberfan at or about the time the first precognitive dreams and premonitions were starting to occur. Since we have no conclusive evidence of what UFOs are or why they occur, it's purely speculative to attempt to draw conclusions from the above. But if UFOs are manifestations from a different time field and involve intelligences, and a lot of people now suspect this may be so, then the Aberfan witnesses may have picked up on precognitions via telepathy from these intelligences. This may seem wild, but the facts are pretty wild.
Facts are pretty wild.
And I would say that, again, if you're looking at sort of the idea I put forward that this stuff moves backwards in time, that tragedy not only may have given some of these people precognition that it was coming, but may have also created enough energy to create a UFO sighting.
Yeah, now you're starting to make me think of the whole prophecy part of the Mothman prophecies as well. There's definitely something to be said about unexplainable things, and I think having spent some time pondering this, I certainly don't expect to get all the answers, but it seems to make sense in the theory of some sort of purging of the nervous system in some way. If you are picking up on And, this is much more of a philosophical idea than a scientific one, but you guys will probably appreciate this. I've always wondered about, you have a really impactful moment in your life, and that moment, which could happen tomorrow, is going to affect the rest of your life. And it almost feels like if it's so impactful that it's going to affect the rest of your life, there's that much energy ahead of you. Might you not be able to feel that, a dog sniffing out a storm or something like that?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. I think there might be something to that.
Well,
it also makes me wonder if I've often wondered this in specific cases, but if there's a connection between manifestation and precognition, where manifesting something intentionally may just be your knowledge that it's already going to happen.
Right.
And whatever this event is retro-causally making you make it happen. So it's kind of like a bootstrap paradox for events that aren't paranormal.
Yeah.
Well, I think too that when you look at the psi research, you see that emotional stuff is the stuff we can actually track moving backwards in time. It's the stuff people have the precognition about. So if stuff doesn't just move in one direction, if it actually can move backwards, then like the Mothman Prophecy situation is like the ideal, perfect storm of this, where, that bridge collapse couldn't have been a more traumatic event. Small town, Christmas time, all those deaths, that's, unthinkably horrible. And if that information moved back, and because some people had precognitive dreams of presence floating in the water and stuff.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But most people probably picked this up, but had no avenue to translate it. So it just became stress, which then became poltergeist energy, which then became the Mothman, or something that came along and used that energy, because suddenly there's this whole pool of energy there, and it picks it up and it utilizes it to try and communicate.
Yeah, and some people, the skeptic might consider that so far-fetched, but then you look into the easiest, most astounding example of anything vaguely similar to a group, collective, continuous manifestation, or the miracles at Fatima.
Right.
And I like how Jacques Vallee breaks that down as well. Whatever, you could take the religious trimmings and set them aside, and there's still some really weird stuff going on there.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely the same with Point Pleasant. Even if, I'm sure that some of those sightings were probably owls and whatever else, but just everything that went on, you look at that whole story of what happened to that town, it's absolutely bonkers. There's too much to be skeptical about. How many angles you're gonna be, if you're skeptical about it, you're gonna have to chase down a lot more angles than just that owl. So good luck.
Right. The Men in Black stuff.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, all and then the surrounding stuff like Indrid Cold and all that, and the rabbit hole goes further and further. It was a weird time.
Yeah, and one of the things Keel said about the people of the town is that they seem to be more sensitive than average people. So again, prime candidates for creating PK energy.
Yeah,
and there were poltergeist experiences and stuff that were just typical poltergeist experiences happening during that time period too. And it all stops when the bridge collapses.
Yeah, it really does sound like it would be made up. It's a classic story for a reason. There's a reason people still talk about it plenty. But yeah, the Men in Black thing is a whole other thing. I don't remember. He doesn't go into Men in Black aside from his own personal experiences in the Goblin Universe, does he?
Yeah, not really.
Because I know there's
this is wild though.
Yeah, I don't remember that one enough to tell the story. If you guys want to get into that,
I grabbed that one.
Cool.
I just because what happens after the exorcism of Loch Ness.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely have to talk about that.
But the thing I wanted to bring up before that though is that when you look at precognition and stuff like this, what does that say about free will versus determinism? Are there some points in our lives that are set? Can we screw it up? Or are we just on an already planned out path and we don't know it?
I don't think it's as simple as there's one way or another. I think Wargo definitely seems to err on the side of determinism, where it's already determined. From what I understand, I haven't really read his books. I've just heard him.
He thinks we live in a static universe and that we're just picking this stuff up from the future and there's no free will.
Right. And I don't agree with that.
No, neither do I.
I think well, just from divination, having read tarot for years, I've always thought that it's not fixed. I mean, I can tell you generally what's going to happen, but I can see where there's going to be forks in the road too.
Yeah.
So why would you be able to advise anybody at all? And I've definitely felt like I've intuitively felt at points in my own life that there is a choice I can make at specific junctures, and I think that largely there's a grand scheme that's already mostly mapped out, but each of us has free will at specific moments,
Yeah. Well, like I said, it's possible we can screw it up.
Yeah, we absolutely can, and we often do.
Yeah. I guess I'm in a movie mood, but I'm gonna keep bringing it. You made me think of the movie Dark City. You guys have seen that, right?
Oh yeah.
I think, yeah, that's a great thought experiment example. I do think that there's something like on a practical, more practical level, the idea of like addicts suddenly turning it around and getting clean. Like, I guess, that's more philosophical than scientific, but there seems to be, there just absolutely, there's no doubt in my mind that there's something about the, you could call it the soul, whether or not it exists after death. I'm inclined to believe so, but I don't know. And there's something about the human being that it's probably something that's followed us through our whole adaptation process. Like, it makes you wonder about like how people started processing their own internal monologue at the beginning of like the dawn of the concept of anything we had about like an internal life or metaphysics or philosophy. Yeah, I don't know. It's there's a lot of different directions you could go in.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So basically they tried to do an exorcism of Loch Ness, and basically nothing happened. And afterwards, he wanted to go visit this UFO landing site that had happened a few weeks, I think, prior to them doing this. And the exorcist told him he shouldn't do it. And then the woman he was staying with, Mrs. Carey, he says, cautioned me strongly against visiting the UFO landing site. She was sitting in her usual armchair with her back to the window and overlooking the front garden. I was facing the window. Basil was on my right pouring a drink at the sideboard. Mrs. Carey said, one reads of people being whisked away. It may be nonsense, but I shouldn't go. Coming on top of Dr. Ormond's similar advice, I decided then I would not go. At that precise moment, there was a tremendous rushing sound like a tornado outside of the window, and the garden seemed to be filled with an indefinable frantic movement. A series of violent thuds sounded as if from a heavy object striking either wall or the sun lounge door. Through the window behind Mrs. Carey, I suddenly saw what looked like a pyramid-shaped column of blackish smoke about 8 feet high, revolving in a frenzy. Part of it was involved in a rose bush, which looked as if it was being ripped out of the ground. Mrs. Carey shrieked, and I turned her face to the window. The episode lasted 10 or 15 seconds, and then was instantly finished. I sat there staring at the window, feeling alarmed and rather peculiar. Basil, who was preparing his drink, had heard nothing, and he turned in amazement when his wife screamed. Dutifully, he searched the garden, but found it silent and quite normal. The next morning, I asked Miss Carey to record the incident as she saw it, and she said we were sitting in the sitting room. I had my back to the window. Ted Holliday was facing me sitting on the sofa. My husband was in the room, standing on my left by the sideboard. We were discussing flying saucers or something of that sort. Ted told me the story of one that was supposed to have landed on the far side of the glen up on top of the hills, and he was thinking of going up there to take photos, and I said, I don't think I would. If I were you, I wouldn't go near the place. One has heard stories about people being whisked into space. I don't think it would be good to go near there, and I repeated this. And then suddenly there was the most frightful noise, 3 terrific crashes just outside the window by the front door, as if something was hurting itself at the door, I think, or the window, I'm not sure. Looking over my shoulder, I got the impression that there was something at the window, although I didn't see exactly what it was. Then looking at Ted, I saw a beam of white light that shot across the room from the window on my left. I saw a white circle of light on Ted Holliday's forehead. It was a white light, not like electric light, and the circle was about 3 or 4 inches in diameter. I thought the house had been struck by lightning with this light shooting across the room, but I couldn't understand why the light was white, and I got a terrible fright. The light stayed on for only perhaps a second, but I definitely saw it. There was no question about it. I said to Ted, "What on earth's that? What happened?" And he said to my husband, "What was that? You better go see." He said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I never heard a thing." He went out to look, but there was nothing there. It gave us an awful fright. It gave Ted a fright, too. I couldn't imagine what those frightful crashes and this light shooting in the window were. He said he'd seen a dark, swirly shape outside the window. Well, I saw something there, but I couldn't say what it was. What I really noticed was this beam of light shooting across the room onto Ted's forehead, the white circle on his head. This light was only visible to Mrs. Carey. Although I was staring fixedly at the window throughout, I saw nothing of it. The really odd part was that it evidently illuminated the precise area where the holy water had been applied to the exorcism.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, AP.
Oh, it's a lot of classic high strangeness going on there. So I have a lot more background on this stuff too, because the guy that did the exorcism of Loch Ness, pretty colorful character that I ended up looking into him quite a bit. And I talked about him on a recent episode of Conspiranormal about a month or two ago. And it's also up on my blog where I wrote about it. But this dude, Dr. Omand, was in addition to exercising Loch Ness, also exercised the Bermuda Triangle, battled vampires, and
wasn't he also a circus exorcist?
Yes, he worked for the circus, and his first exorcism was exorcising demons out of a pair of lions that just killed the lion tamer.
Yeah, and there's some quote in here where he emphasizes to Holiday where they have to get as close to the center of the loch as possible for the exorcism. And he asks him why, and he says, well, it's the same principle as my circus exorcisms. I got to be in the cage with the animals. Like, man, this guy's a wild dude. I sure would like to have a drink with him.
Yeah, and he was a little old man, which is the funniest part. Like, he reminds me of like Mr. Magoo. Like, he's just like this little old guy, but he's like battling vampires and circus lions that are possessed by demons and things like that. Some of his exorcisms were just at bad intersections where where he claimed there was a black spot that was causing people to have accidents.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Wow. What a character.
The whole book. There's two different books about him. There's one that I think he wrote and about his life, and the one that I have, which is the man who exorcised the Bermuda Triangle. But wild character, and he's pretty great. But the getting to the center of the loch was part of it, because what he actually did was a separate exorcism at 4 different points on the shore and one in the middle, and it was supposed to approximate a cross.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
And it was never his intent to exorcise the monster from the loch. What he was trying to do was exercise the evil influence over men's minds that the monster may or may not have been exerting. Like, the monster itself might be extraneous. It might be beside the point. He's just trying to eliminate the evil aura of the loch.
You know, distinction. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because it all sounds really wacky. And Omand is one of these guys that the name came up a lot when I was reading about Loch Ness as a kid, because I was obsessed with Loch Ness. You'd always hear about this exorcism, but it was treated as kind of like a gimmick. And I never really thought of Omand being much worth looking into. But when you actually hear his reasoning behind stuff, he sounds a lot more sane than you might think.
See, that's I actually find the mindset refreshing. I don't know how much I don't know all, I can't say that. I don't know even where I would begin to gauge the follow through on that. But I do think the idea of I don't know, it's certainly a very cool, like, comic book kind of inspired idea. And it's if there are commonalities, if we are just tapping into some to like the shadow complex of our psyches, that's, creating some sort of window further into, potentially other autonomous or sentient unexplainable phenomena, then it would follow that you might be able to exercise something, or at least take the energy from something like Loch Ness. I remember, being young, like, it's like out of high school, like really sinking my teeth into these ideas more and wondering like, man, what if all this isn't separated? Like, what if you could find the right words or the right mentality and then just summon a Bigfoot in the wilderness?
Yeah.
It's not off the table,
No, it's definitely not.
That's the thing is like Omand was big on distinguishing these things because he would get called to clear a house of ghosts. And if he found that it was just a regular ghost and it wasn't hurting anybody, he would just talk the homeowner into learning how to coexist with the ghost.
Awesome.
And he felt the same way about Loch Ness. He thought Nessie could very well just be the ghost of a dinosaur. And if that's the case, it's fine. Like, there's no reason you can't have a dinosaur ghost in your lake.
Yeah.
As long as it's not evil, all I'm here to do is to clear the evil away, So I mean, it's a very nuanced view. And I mean, the man wasn't a slouch because he did have a PhD in theology, his doctorate. He worked with a psychology foundation that was international in Europe. So he ended up doing a lot of things in Sweden. They would defer to him when it came to matters of faith, So he had kind of a psychology background as well. At least he had a lot of colleagues that were. Speaking of Sweden, the UFO sighting that they're referencing in there, that was a man called Jan of Sundberg, and he was a Swedish. He's kind of gone down in history as kind of a huckster kind of investigator and writer. Swedish investigator and writer Fred Anderson has written about him. If you can find his blog or his Medium account, he writes on Medium. Sundberg's an interesting character on his own, but apparently that sighting was probably made up, because where he was basically talking about a flying saucer having landed in a clearing at a very specific place on the loch.
Right.
Where there didn't exist a clearing. Like, when people went to investigate it, there was no clearing there. It was all just trees, and there wasn't room for what he described to have happened, Which
makes me wonder if he did experience something, but it was something very much stranger than just a UFO landing.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean it's not true. And the fact that he makes stuff up also doesn't mean it's not true.
True. But I mean, why make
Holiday is driving at for the whole book? Like, the first sentence of the book is like, we never really can know what's true and what's not.
Right. And if you're going to make something up, why would you make something up that would be that easily disproved?
Well, you're just banking on the fact that nobody's going to go check.
That's true.
Especially if he's going to go back to Sweden and tell the tale in Swedish.
That's a good point. So anyway, this continues this experience, because he says the next morning before breakfast, I decided to step down to the lower caravan to collect some oddments for my suitcase. Across the grass beyond the roadway at the top of the slope leading down to the Loch Ness, at the top of which the caravan was located, stood a figure. It was a man dressed entirely in black. Unlike other walkers who sometimes paused along here to admire the Loch Ness panorama, this one had his back to the loch and was staring at me fixedly as soon as I turned the corner. Indeed, to all appearances, he was waiting for me. We were about 30 yards apart, and for several seconds I stayed back, wondering who the hell this was. Simultaneously, I felt a strong sensation of malevolence, cold and passionless. Passionless, okay. Vaguely, I remembered Sundberg's black figures around the UFO, and for a second I tried to form an association. But the notion seemed so utterly absurd, in broad daylight, with half a dozen friends and within calling distance, that I shut the idea out. I walked forward warily, never taking my eyes off the figure. He was about 6 feet tall and appeared to be dressed in a black leather or plastic. He wore a helmet and gloves and was masked, even to the nose, mouth, and chin. The eyes were covered in goggles, but on closer approach I could detect no eyes behind the lenses. The figure remained motionless as I approached, except possibly for a slight stirring of the feet. It didn't speak, and I couldn't hear any breathing. I drew level and hesitated slightly, uncertain what to do next, then walked past at a range of about a yard. I stopped a few feet beyond him and gazed out at the Loch Ness. I stayed thus for perhaps 10 seconds, making a decision. Something about the figure seemed abnormal, and I felt the need to test whether or not it was real. I started to turn with the vague plan of pretending to slip on the grass so that I might lurch against the figure and thus check its solidity, but this proved impossible. As I was turning my head, I heard a curious whispering or whistling sound, and as I swung around to find the man had gone. In 2 steps, I was on the road. There was about half-mile empty road visible to the right and about 100 yards to the left. No living person could have gotten out of sight so quickly, yet he had undoubtedly gone. And the follow-up to this is that he says, when I returned to Loch Ness in 1974 to continue investigations, I was stopped for a few days with a heart attack. As a stretcher carried me up the side of the loch, I peered groggily over the side and noted with cynical approval that we had just passed over the exact spot where the man in black stood the previous year. Synchronicity and the forces that control it never give up.
Indeed.
Yep.
But
Yeah,
that-
pretty good cherry on top to a lot of themes that we've discussed right there.
Yes. And again,
Yeah, I mean, that could have killed him too. And I think he eventually did die of heart disease or a heart attack.
did
I
he?
think so.
So I mean, it's kind of interesting when you consider the associations between Men in Black and the Grim Reaper. The whole the motif there.
True.
Yeah.
Also, a really bizarre Man in Black, like plastic or leather, and like
Yeah.
the helmet and goggles, and he just seems like a psycho biker from hell.
Right? But again, if you look at that idea that energy moves backwards in time, maybe the fact that he had a heart attack a year later on that spot is what caused the Man in Black apparition.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very possible.
You know, it was him, he that's how he interpreted that energy coming back, because he couldn't get it on a one-to-one basis.
Yeah, and I mean, there's precedent for this sort of thing, like with doppelgangers.
Yeah.
There's a story of Goethe meeting his own likeness on the road, and then something. I think he like ended up being a premonition of something. Probably shouldn't have even brought that up if I can't remember the story that well.
Yeah, you're right though. I totally forgot about that. I wish I knew the story better as well, but there is an instance of a doppelganger with Goethe. Yeah, the Men in Black, your listeners are probably pretty familiar. Like it's I'm sure it's not uncharted territory here, but I think to like someone uninitiated, quote unquote, it might sound weird to have Men in Black lumped in with like the actual unexplainable phenomena. But and AP and I have talked about this before. I'm pretty sure we brought it up when you were on my show. But we talked about the researcher Jim Keith, who is another Fortean researcher, and he had a whole small book dedicated to the Men in Black, and he broke it down into a few different categories where he said that there's definitely, just some traditional alphabet agency types going on. But then if you're actually looking into it, very quickly, we start to see really strange, what you would call Fortean phenomena, to the extent that it almost seems like if there's any recurring themes with the Men in Black, it seems like they are trying to imitate humans.
Yeah.
Which is so weird. Like, it's surprising, but Men in Black might be some of the most interesting of the paranormal phenomena. It's just, what is going on? It doesn't make that much sense. What are they doing? What are they probing? But Jim Keith also goes into how, like that sort of Grim Reaper esoteric. He draws archetypal lines of comparison to, like the motif of, like cloaked black magicians in the woods. Like, these ideas of these figures in black that are mysterious and foreboding have always been with us, and potentially it's just the continuation of that.
Oh, that makes sense.
But whatever be the case, alphabet agencies aside, there's some, if no listeners have gone down that rabbit hole, the stories in the given by people like John Keel is a great example. Got some wild Men in Black accounts. Yeah. What do you think about all that, AP?
Well, one of the things about the strange behavior of Men in Black, to me, from the perspective of totally normal but still very weird phenomena, is the concept of shock induction with hypnosis. It's possible that just by doing something absurd and bizarre enough, you can shock somebody's sensibilities and they become suggestible during that time.
Yeah.
The one way of doing this, I suppose, if you know how, is like kind of knocking the knees out from somebody so they fall. And then when you're catching them, you can draw them into the state. It's a sudden shock to the system.
That's a great point.
So just the uncanniness of the bizarre behavior. Like we think about the man in black in Point Pleasant in Mary Hyer's office that's like looking at a pen like he's never seen one before.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and she says, you know, you can just take the pen if you like it so much. And then he just runs out the door and he's like cackling like he just fooled her somehow, you know. Stuff like that that's just unsettling or confusing can put people into a kind of a trance state, which I'm not a hypnotist and I can't really explain it beyond that, but I have heard it described that way from mentalists and hypnotists. And it should be mentioned that those sorts of people were working with alphabet agencies during MK Ultra. So
yeah. And I believe in Dimensions, Vallee mentions sort of that as a way of disarming people. Like I use as the example of someone asking what time it is, and then they answer and they say, no, it's 2:00, and then they walk away.
Right.
You know, just leaving someone disconcerted, like what just happened, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it leaves them in a potentially more suggestible state.
Yeah, I live in a city where that's just how people behave. So, I mean, it wouldn't work on me.
It's also interesting that he points out that Loch Ness is basically along a fault line. And so when you look at like Devereaux's work, that you know UFOs are most common along fault lines, there's no reason that sea monsters wouldn't also be common along fault lines if it's sort of an energy thing, if it's creating a particular type of energy.
Well, Holiday was also big on ley lines.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The Watkins Old Street track stuff, and he gets into that a lot in The Dragon and the Disc.
Yeah.
And also in the Dyfed Enigma, which is an amazing book that nobody ever talks about. I
actually don't know that one. What is it?
It's called the Dyfed Enigma.
Okay.
It's spelled Dyfed, but it's Welsh, so it's pronounced David. And it's a collaboration between himself and Randall Jones Pugh, who was part of the British UFO Research Association. And it's about a UFO flap in West Wales in 1977, I think.
Wow.
Yeah. Including a flying saucer landing outside a school.
Whoa.
In Pembroke, I think. And then the Ripperston Farm saga, which that has a ton of high strangeness around it. But yeah, excellent book. It's a really good, really highly strange series of UFO accounts from the 70s in West Wales.
Interesting. I was not aware of that.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I'd never hear anybody talk about this book. Our Strange Skies recently did a podcast about those events and referenced that book, but largely I don't ever hear anybody talk about it, which is a shame because it's a really good one.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look into that as well.
And it's a lot easier to find than the Goblin Universe. So
oh, good.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about ley lines, honestly. Like I've seen some people present some interesting stuff, and other people seem to be able to dismiss it just as validly. So I'm sort of torn on it.
That's how I feel as well. I was curious what you guys thought of it. It's one of those things where I could definitely I haven't done the full amount of research that I could on it. My brain tends to go more philosophical and psychological. But from what I understand, it seems to make a heuristic level of sense with the idea of like, you know, heuristic being trial and error, observation and understanding of the world around you. I feel like there's probably some sort of merit to it, but I don't think it's, you know, no pun intended, but I don't think it's like very straightforward. Yeah. But you know, I think that there's something to it. It makes sense that you know, like as above, so below. If there's an anatomy to the human being, like even energetically, I guess, if you will, then I'm sure there is to the earth as well. I kind of think of astrology the same way. I'm not one that puts a lot of personal weight into astrology, but when you look at it as like on a historical level, the philosophy of astronomy, and considering the idea that maybe some of these things, like an interesting takeaway for me with that is potentially our relationship, our distance to the sun, more so than these other planets, might have, clearly it has some sort of effect on life.
Certainly.
Yeah, so I think that there's, with these kinds of things, these like old school, you call it esoteric, physical, like geographical sciences, I just say with a grain of salt. I think it's very heuristically interesting, but I don't really know how far it goes.
All right, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Quick mid-show break here, and I'm going to give you some contact info and a recommendation. So contact info is simple. Everything is at wheredidtheroadgo.com. And if you have a story you want to share for a listener story show, stories at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Everything else can be sent to contact at wheredidtheroadgo.com. You can become a patron there for only $3, get extra content all month long. And links to all our social media, Discord, everything can be found on the website. All right, as far as recommendations, I'm going to go with a fairly new sci-fi TV series called Silo. Now, I'm only 3 episodes in, but it's really good. And I saw an article recently that people really weren't talking about it, and it was an excellent show, so I decided to check it out. And they were right. It's an excellent show, and it's on Apple TV or Apple Plus, whatever that's called. And sometime in the future, people are living in this gigantic silo. Not like a missile silo. It's just a sort of vertical-based structure that is huge. And they think the outside air is contaminated and they can't go outside, but there are people who are starting to doubt that narrative. And it's really, really good so far. There's a lot of mystery to it and a lot of stuff they can work out over the course of the season. The acting is excellent. The writing is excellent. So if you like sci-fi and you like, sort of I don't want to call it post-apocalyptic because it is in a sense like whatever. They don't know what happened, why they're in this silo. Mystery science fiction, let's say, with some maybe political tinges around the sides as they're dealing with what the higher ups may be hiding from them. So I would say from 3 episodes in, this is highly recommended. This is a really cool show. Silo, Silo. All right, with that, let's go back to our conversation about the Goblin Universe. So you're listening to Where Did the Road Go? And I have here with me Mr. Anthony Tyler.
How you doing, folks?
And AP Strange.
Hey.
And we're talking about the Goblin Universe from Ted Holiday. And this book really does go all over the place.
Everywhere.
Which I guess was his point, is he was trying to kind of show how these things all have similar connections. One of the things I noticed, he's talking about the black cat sightings. And I realized that a lot of these sightings, like monster sightings and UFO sightings, tend to happen in flaps.
Mm-hmm.
And then they behave like poltergeist sightings, the fact that they build to a certain point and then they just kind of decay. Without anything ever being caught.
Yeah, I think at this point, though, I think very recently, British authorities have just kind of admitted that they have big cats in the UK now.
But have they caught any?
I don't know that they've actually caught any, but they have enough evidence that they're like, yeah, I mean, there are some. We're not going to continue saying they're not, but
yeah, I know I can't remember where, because it's been a minute since I've looked into this, but there are parts of the U.S. that, like I want to say, I think Texas is one example where there's and I don't remember the specific cat, but a giant cat that's not supposed to be in Texas, like a cougar or a mountain lion or something, and the only point being is that there are definitely instances of people finding these, whether they be big cats or other species, where it starts out as like Fortean mythology, and then eventually people are like, oh, I guess this is a thing. Like with the platypus was the same way.
Oh, sure.
So,
yeah.
But the big cats, it gets a little extra for sure. It's I don't know how to fully sift through that sometimes. It's just a wild story.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other things I clipped here is he says, what did I do here? Yeah, a large body of testimony holds that fairies are repelled by iron. This observation may turn out to be very significant because many modern students of the UFO phenomena are convinced that geomagnetism is fundamental to the production of the effects. And iron, as any first-year electrical student knows, is reactive to magnetic fields. There's an increasing amount of evidence that UFOs are intimately related to the magnetic forces, and therefore that soft iron at the local level may indeed have an inhibiting effect on the phenomena. Now remember, this is being written in 1970 something. This is not current day. And that's very similar to where things are going now.
Yeah. On that note, as just maybe a tiny side note, I wanted to ask you, AP, because you brought up that this like Fortean projectionist sort of thought was a lot more common at the time, and it seems like it's gotten a little more of a resurgence recently after a lull. Why?
Yeah, I absolutely think that's true, and I'm happy to see it.
Yeah. Why do you think that was? What was the lull for?
I think it's just a pendulum swing. This pendulum swings one way and then it swings back the other. We go from materialism to more metaphysical ideas, symbolic ideas, and then it swings back and forth. Sometimes all it takes is evidence appearing, and that can be very distracting, or sensational report. I mean, as evidenced by the fact that Holliday didn't want this book released because he was so convinced by the famous Flipper photo. And I guess I have to explain this stuff because when I say famous, it's only famous in my head at this point.
I think as far as Loch Ness goes, that's a pretty famous photo.
Okay, people still know the photo. Somebody got a photo that appears to be a diamond-shaped flipper, and the naturalist Sir Peter Scott was so convinced by this evidence that he actually gave Nessie a Latin name, a Linnaean category, which was Nessiterus rhombopteryx, which is translated as the nest dweller with the diamond-shaped fin. So I mean. Here you have F.W. Holliday, who followed this arc where in his first book, The Great Orm of Loch Ness, he's describing a biological creature. His idea was that Nessie was actually a mollusk. An example, a gigantic version of the ancient Telemonstrum gregarium, which was basically like a invertebrate that we only see in the fossil record, and usually they're very tiny, the ones that we have. And we only know of them through imprints that they left in fossilized stone. He went from there to The Dragon and the Disc, where he gets a lot more esoteric and talks about mythology and ley lines and magic and fairies and all kinds of things. And then his thought evolved to the point where he's talking about like a matrix of reality that is much stranger than we're able to perceive. And when he gets this far, all of a sudden evidence that Nessie may be a flesh and blood creature is so accepted that a famous naturalist is giving it a Latin name. He abandons it altogether, and he wants to go back to that biological entity hypothesis, and that was part of the reason he really wanted to abandon this book. He didn't want it out there, is he was embarrassed by it because he now thought his original hypothesis was way closer.
Oh, wow. Okay. Good insight.
Right. That's the arc of Holliday's evolving thoughts on things, which is amazing because you're almost seeing somebody come to these realizations in real time where he's you could see he struggled with it. Like this was all very emotionally important to him,
Very.
And he was honest, intellectually honest enough to keep changing how he viewed the thing based on what was coming out evidentially.
Right, exactly. And he almost thought he would look foolish if he was to publish the Goblin Universe as it was, or to continue down that road in the face of evidence of a biological creature.
Right.
So,
which of course has amounted to nothing.
Well, right. Now we're doing DNA sampling of the loch and finding nothing out of the ordinary.
Well, like I said, the fact that there's a fault line running under there is interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because that's energy. And he talks a little more about this. He says a study done by Sebastian Rabeau of a 1972 UFO wave in Puerto Rico showed that the majority of sightings occurred within a 30-mile or a 30-kilometer radius of areas which are magnetically anomalous. Areas which have a good deal of higher or lower than average reading, magnetically speaking, are found all over the planet, although it's far from clear what causes them. Rabeau noticed that the odd fact that UFOs were never sighted directly over the anomalous areas, but always from the periphery outwards. John Keel believed this outward extension of the phenomena may be up to about 320 kilometers. Now, when I had Greg, oh my God, I can't remember his last name.
Greg Little.
Greg Little, thank you. We were talking about a Marian apparition in Egypt, and every time that apparition shows up, there's an earthquake within 300 miles. And what that connection is unknown, but it was a fairly consistent thing they found.
Yeah.
And there was another one here where he talks about...
Isn't there also like earth lights? Isn't that a phenomenon associated with earthquakes?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was this one with the eels. He said, Mr. and Mrs. Eric Hiscock on the round-the-world voyage in their yacht Wanderer 3 had left Fiji and were about 400 miles out to sea, heading for Australia when they came across a mass of creatures which they at first mistook for ordinary sea snakes. Eric Hiscock records, the sea was literally alive with them, and at times it was impossible to plunge the boat hook down without touching one. Near the surface, there were little snakes, a foot or less in length, but lower down, just within boat hook reach, were snakes as long as the Wanderer, their boat, which was 30 feet, and as thick as my arm. They were of a jelly-like substance, pale brown in color, with dark brown regular markings on them. Our attempts to capture one failed, because when we got the boat hook under it, which was easy enough to do as the creatures were slow-moving and took no avoiding action, and lifted part a bit above the surface, the snake immediately broke in two, and the two snakes went wriggling along where one had been before. We have since seen sea snakes of a more substantial nature, particularly in the Arafura Sea, which were solid land-like snakes with tough skins. But the jelly-like snakes we met that calm day in the South Pacific must have been out of the ordinary, for we have never seen anything of the kind since, nor have we met anyone familiar with them. That evening, the Hiscocks picked up a broadcast from Fiji saying that a minor earthquake had taken place, resulting in a 15-foot tidal wave. They wondered, reasonably enough, if some great underwater disturbance had forced the creatures up from the abyss. This would account for the large number and their sluggish behavior. The transparent appearance can be accounted for by suggesting that they were larval forms, because submarine larvae are indeed transparent. What a 30-foot larva would become as an adult boggles the imagination, however.
Huh.
Yep.
So again, though, you have an earthquake happening right around something anomalous.
It just makes me think of Godzilla.
Yeah.
And also, there was a sea serpent photo that from the 70s that caused a lot of controversy. That was, I think, taken in Australia or off the coast of New Zealand, and it was people were referred to it as a tadpole. It almost looks like a gigantic tadpole. It's got a guy on a rowboat. Yep. I love that photo, and I used to, as a kid, imagine that it was a tadpole, which would imply the existence of enormous sea frogs. That would be awesome,
as prophesied by H.P. Lovecraft.
I got a question for you guys. Since I've talked to both of you about this before, so I'd be interested in your thoughts. Given that we've done all this legwork, and I don't want to derail it too much, but given that we've brought up UFOs in this Goblin Universe setting, where do you guys think, to have it somewhat topical, I guess? Like, I really want to know where you think this puts us with all this public fascination and preoccupation that we have on UFOs. What do you think the implications are, if I guess would be the more pointed question? What do you think the implications are if the Goblin Universe plays a role in UFO phenomena? And what is this dangling carrot that everyone is clamoring after right now when it comes to government, secret tech, and all this stuff? Because I'm extremely skeptical, to say the least. Yeah,
well, we just did a show on this recently, and the problem with all this disclosure stuff is it's the same people over and over again.
Right.
I mean, you look at this latest guy who comes out, of course, with no evidence, same claims that have been made a million times, and then you look and, he was, very connected to Greer, to Louis Elizondo, to Hal Puthoff. It's the same names again and again and again.
Yeah, he didn't even get into it until 2017 when he read the article about the Tic Tac.
Yeah. It's just like for some reason they want to push this narrative, whether it's there's a goal there somewhere, whether it be funding for space weapons or who knows? Who knows what the end game is, but I doubt they're going to tell us anything useful about UFOs.
Agreed.
On a metaphysical and philosophical level, though, I think it's just ufology as a sociological phenomena interacting with the phenomena in a way where I think anybody with a genuine interest and intellectual honesty approaching the subject has to go through their own sort of chapel perilous of ufology.
True.
And it involves, it's like an initiation that involves enchantment and disillusionment over and over again.
Yeah.
Until you find a path that you're comfortable with. And in my case, and in the way I see it, especially with people who are experiencers, I think it has a lot more to do with self-discovery than it does anything else, like coming to terms with who you are.
Well, but I think there's a bunch of stuff going on when we deal with UFOs. I don't think there's any one thing. I think that the people who have repeated experiences, that is definitely seems to be the case. It seems to be some kind of shamanistic awakening, spiritual
I'm just talking
path.
about the subject broadly, and even approaching the subject as something you want to investigate.
Oh yeah.
Like Greenfield talks about this a little bit in the book Saucers and Saucerers. It was kind of a collection of stuff that he wrote in the 70s. So same time period, I guess. But everybody from the experiencer to the investigator to the writer of the books to the debunker and to the consumer, the person actually reading the books and reading the stuff and absorbing the material, that's all part and parcel of the phenomena. It's one big holistic thing. We all are the UFO,
I agree with that.
In the magical sense. And I agree with that entirely. I find myself agreeing with Greenfield way more than I would have ever thought, but
I think that, when we actually look at what's behind the phenomenon, though, you have that shamanic sort of thing going on. But I believe so, yeah. But you also have the one-off experiences where someone sees something. They never have any other experiences. It doesn't so much change their life. It's just one of those things. Sometimes they even forget about it for a long time. It's like, the person who doesn't have a bunch of paranormal encounters in their life, but then they see Bigfoot run across the road.
Yeah. Yeah. If nothing else, I, to try and keep swinging at like a philosophical insight here. It seems like anytime something surreal or unexplainable like this happens, even if it's someone that is completely disinterested in it, it just seems to be wherever it comes from, that hermetic trickster wink and a nod from the cosmos. So it's just like, here's something for you. Yeah. Chew on that for a little bit. And one of the only takeaways, I feel like concrete takeaways from something like a concept like the Goblin Universe is, I think that whole wink and a nod is a huge part of it all. I think that's part of what it's doing. Whatever be the case, whatever the context is, that's the message they're getting across.
Yeah.
Whatever they are.
Yeah.
And Holiday does a good point of saying, we don't know what life is. We don't know what death is. We know very little about the universe we inhabit, which is something I've been saying forever. It's just, we think we do. We have this illusion that we understand things, but we really don't. Like no amount of measuring and scientific analysis is going to explain the bigger mysteries in this world, why we're here in the first place.
Well, that's what it's all about, right? Finding meaning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So this seems like a decent place to stop, and we can continue a little bit in a Patreon segment. We can talk. I have a couple other segments I clipped from the book that were really interesting. But we've been talking about the Goblin Universe from Ted Holiday, and technically it's Ted Holiday and Colin Wilson, because as we said, Colin wrote like a fourth of the book in the introduction. And he probably, being an unfinished manuscript, I'm assuming Colin went through and kind of cleaned it up and everything.
Yeah, and he's responsible for it being published, really. I mean, because Holiday had passed away, so it was a posthumous release, and Wilson had gone out of his way to talk to Holiday's widow and make arrangements with Llewellyn to publish it as part of their SciTech series. So
it is available out there, and the price has come down a little bit at least.
That's because I think I bought the most expensive copy, and then that's the way book reselling works online. Is somebody, if it's a rare book and somebody searches around and they see it sold for one price, they'll charge that price.
Right.
And it will stay there until there are no copies left, and then somebody just takes a wild guess and posts it for less.
Yeah, I have a few things in my possession where I'm like, I should sell these, but there's no copies of these, and they're not books. In this case, they're VHS tapes. But these things don't exist out there.
Right.
Like, they're so rare. And I'm like, I don't even know what they're worth, So anyway, Anthony, where can people find you?
You can find pretty much everything, whether it be the show Black Hoodie Alchemy or my books, and excerpts to the books, Dive Manual and Hunt Manual, at divemind.net. It's pretty much a one-stop shop there. You could check out whatever you want. You could catch up with me on Twitter if you want, divemind667. But yeah, thanks to anybody for listening, and thank you both for in joining me in this conversation and having me on Seriah. This was pretty great. It's a lot of fun to a conversation like this takes a little bit of legwork. Like, you can't just have it with anybody. So it's very much appreciated.
And AP, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm still haunting the Twitters, and that's really the only place I'm active on social media. And my blog, of course, apstrange.com. And I've been trying to put more up there, and I've gotten a few. Actually, I've been writing quite a bit this year, so there's plenty up there to read. You can find that exorcism extravaganza piece on there, and a few other things. So check that out.
Nice. And again, I want to shout out to Michael Friske, who provided me with this book so we could do this show.
Yeah, salute.
Yeah, all right. Well done. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I want to give a shout out here to all of my Patreons, because without you, this show would not be possible. And I want to give a special shout out to those who are pledging $10 or more. Illuminati, Greg Ross, Leanne Cherry, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Indrid Cold, 36 Dingo, Matthew Sproul, Andrew Nichols, Christine, a blue second gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Witowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Chris, Craig Cicernos, Greg Parmenter, Diane B., MTK, Eric Todd, History and Coffee, J. Otto Bullitt, Jack Huntington, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Mattingly, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linda, Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, MJ Armstrong, Mark Brady, Mr. Weird, Oli Andre Olar, Patricia W., Paul Jeffries, Philosopher of Mirrors, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Seed Person 1, Stacy Sherwood, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler G. Glimstead, Varosh K., Vincent Trewell, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Annabelle Smith, Caroline Walker, TDT Skunkworks, and Craig Sagastumi. Thank you all so very, very much. There is a lengthy Patreon segment from this show as well for Patreons. I also want to welcome a couple of new patrons, Kerry Blackman and Gonzo Fluffy Buns. Thanks for joining up, and I hope you like the extra content. If you want to become a patron, it's just $3 a month, and you get extra content with almost every show and some extra stuff beyond that occasionally. And I will see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.